T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. All three engines up and burning. 2, 1, 0, and liftoff.
Welcome to the land of Nerd Crushes, the Citizens of Tech podcast. If something we read made a synapse or two fire, we talk about it here. Tech from the past, present, and future are our bailiwick. On the show today, what we can learn from ancient wipe sticks, the incredible shrinking more, hand transplantation, and Tesla. And we start off with a story that's kind of nasty, but it is ancient waste from an ancient place. And let's go back to the Silk Road. So what was the Silk Road? Eric, are you familiar with the Silk Road? Do you have any memories of what that was all about?
I don't have personal memories from the Silk Road. If I was, reincarnated, and I don't know. No. So the path the silk trade would follow, right?
Yeah, essentially. That's my understanding as well. It's an ancient major trade route crossing China and going into the Middle East, covers lots and lots of distance, many hundreds, thousands of miles, depending on which particular branch you might have taken and where you were trying to get. So if you were to look at the Silk Road, you can Google Silk Road and map, and you'll get a bunch of images of what the Silk Road looked like. And in fact, today, you can still follow vestiges of the Silk Road. And hike it. It's like a hiking thing that some people do, I guess. But it's, it's tough. It goes across some deserts and so on, which is kind of brings us to our story. Because some of it crosses deserts, that means we can get a hold of ancient things that were preserved. Not a humid climate where things would have degraded and deteriorated and rotted away, but very dry and arid climates where we've got good opportunity for preservation. Things just waiting for science to appear and go, ooh, what did we find? And what we found here recently was a discovery, a cache of wipe sticks found at a wayside rest area dating back to the Han Dynasty. So we're talking roughly 2,000 years old here. And a wipe stick is exactly what you think it is. You would have used this stick to clean yourself after making a biodeposit. And so, again, thanks to the marvels of dry air, some of the fecal matter on the wipe sticks was preserved. And so what's a good scientist to do? You get a sample under the microscope. Stat!
Obviously, yes.
What else would you do? And what they found, the whole idea is like, what did they eat? What did, what interesting things can we find, left behind by these travelers? And what they found was much intestinal distress.
Oh, my.
Evidence of eggs from tapeworms, roundworms, whipworms, and Chinese liver fluke.
Oh. So, this was just a thing they lived with, apparently.
I guess having parasites in your intestines of this aggressive nature would have been something fairly common in the ancient world. And, we cook meat and make sure that fish and so on all hit a certain temperature when we cook it so that we don't get tapeworms.
I'm also going to sort of guess that the bulk of the people that were making this journey were probably low-wage, low-skill, strong back sort of.
It's got to be some of them. I mean, some of them had to be businessmen doing trades, tradespeople, but some of them had to be more or less human beasts of burden to some degree. Yeah. I'm guessing, but that seems plausible. If there's any historians out there that go, "No, you're wrong," well, tell us,
please,
and we'll admit to being wrong.
I redact that prior statement.
So, okay, the tapeworm, roundworm, whipworm, Chinese liver fluke, eggs. Ugh. Is kind of like, okay, that's a thing that's interesting on its own, and you can kind of imagine what these people dealt with on a day-to-day basis with all that stuff living in their intestinal tract. But more interesting is the suggestion that these travelers came from very, very far, as opposed to just like a town or so away down the Silk Road, which is a thought. How was the Silk Road used? Oh, well, town to town, kind of like the highway. But in fact, we've proven now some people came from very far away carrying their nasty diseases with them. And so I'll quote the article. This piece has come from Ars Technica. Anthropologist Hu Yanye, who co-authored the study, said in a release, "When I first saw the Chinese liver fluke egg down the microscope, I knew that we had made a momentous discovery. Our study is the first to use archaeological evidence from a site on the Silk Road to demonstrate that travelers were taking infectious diseases with them over huge distances. Though historian Valerie Hansen argues that most people use the Silk Road simply to travel between towns, we now have proof that at least some of those travelers came a long way indeed.
Huh. So, yeah, long haul trucking versus...
And barely ate rotten meat to get down the road. I mean, and seriously, that you figure if they went long distances, that must have been part of the equation.
Right, food preservation technology.
If they didn't, if not everything was dried appropriately, I'm speculating that their food supply it suffered from some infestations, and they ate it anyway.
Yeah, right.
Which reminds me of something a friend of mine once told me. Mustard. The origin of mustard was to cover the smell and taste of rotten meat. Use powerful mustard to kind of, you're going to get your protein, and we're going to use this mustard to mask just how awful this meat actually is.
I can fully believe that.
So
some of those mustards are downright pungent.
So refrigerators are wonderful things, citizens. Yeah. Oh, Eric, you found a piece here. Transistors can't feasibly shrink much more, and I know we've hit this on the show before. That the problem we're almost getting to the atomic level with transistors and stuff, right?
Yeah, the size that we're working on, or the lack of size, is frankly amazing. But Moore's law shall apparently continue. Transistors are obviously very small, right? Really, really, really small. Intel and other companies are working at the 14 nanometer scale at this point, which, we've heard 65, 32, 20 something, now we're at 14. How small is a nanometer? Well, your average ant is 5 million nanometers long.
Ants are huge.
They're massive, yeah. The head of a pin is 1.5 million nanometers.
Which is helpful to discover that angel's dancing question.
Right, because if one is a nanometer, you could have 1.5 million of them dancing on them. Your hairs are about 100 nanometers wide, and human blood cells are 7,500 nanometers across.
Wow. Bigger than I would have thought. Okay.
Yeah. It's simultaneously very small and seems larger than you would think. But DNA strands are 2.5 nanometers across, or wide. We're not talking length, but width.
We're getting down to DNA encoding scale for transistors.
Yeah.
Not quite that small at 14 nanometers, but 14 versus 2.5 nanometers.
6 times,
wow.
Yeah, 6 times the size of a DNA strand's width.
Oh,
it's
okay.
Crazy. So it's obviously, as the scale has shrunken and shrunk and shrunk and shrunk, it's gotten progressively harder to make smaller transistors.
Because how is Bob going to hold the gun to etch the silicon?
I know.
And hold it steady?
Yeah,
it's just, I don't know.
He's got a steady hand, but that's getting that's out there. So to put this in perspective, in the year 2000, so this is 16 years ago now, there were about 20 quote-unquote leading-edge CPU manufacturers. Now there are 4. There's Intel, Global Foundries, that's who produces AMD's CPU dies, and IBM actually recently got out of the CPU game by selling their business to Global Foundries. Now, there's also Samsung and TSMC. So there are only 4 companies that are, considered the big dogs.
Which rings a bell with me reading about Apple and iPhone contracts, who's going to manufacture the A9 chip or whatever that's going to go into the latest iPhone. Samsung and TSMC are the companies that come up all the time, different awards and the amount of volume that's expected to be had. Now, do you happen to know if this would also affect custom silicon manufacturers that do things like ASIC design and for special purpose chips?
I don't honestly know. I would assume there are implications here.
Well, you got a company like Broadcom that makes Ethernet chips in the networking industry. Do they make their own, do their own etching, or do they actually farm that out to one of these 4?
I'm going to imagine they farm out a lot of their manufacturing, but they're also not as size obsessed.
True.
So you don't need 14 nanometer transistors in your networking gear.
Because you're not making a general purpose CPU, you're making an ASIC that does one specific set of things.
Right.
So now we're down to these 4. Okay. They've just kind of gotten out of the game because it's presumably too expensive, consolidation in the industry, et cetera.
Yeah. And just, trying to compete with Intel. Really is the other big reason, and it's diminishing returns as you try to make things smaller and smaller and smaller. It's more expensive to do so. So to get any further progress in regard to Moore's law, we're really looking at abandoning current design methodologies entirely. That seems to be the most likely path forward. So one of those is gate-all-around tech, which uses a substrate layer with nanowires that literally have the logic gate all around them.
So more 3D than 2D?
Well, it kind of starts off sort of 2D, but then it's going to move. I mean, the logical progression is going to be moving into a 3D space where it's a vertical, alignment, so that we can fit more, because the density goes up as you're able to lift off of the substrate of the chip. So that's similar to what we've seen with VNAND memory, with SSDs, the size skyrocketing and the price coming down significantly over the last few years.
And that's all silicon. That's not something other than silicon at this point.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. So the projection, this all comes out of an international audit of, this is where we are today. This is where we see things going in the next 10 to 15 years. In this report, they estimate that in the next 8 years, that will reach its thermal limit. So this new technology that we're talking about here will reach its thermal limit, which is just, we can't cool this. We can't add any more because we can't dissipate enough heat. So something else will be needed. And the article goes on to talk about everything from, microfluidic channels and bioblood, like talking about how we're going to cool and pump liquids through this. So it's sort of an interesting...
Microfluidic channels as in pumping water for cooling purposes through the chip itself?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And actually liquid cooling the internal components of the processors.
How many nanometers is a water molecule? That's anyway. Okay.
So yeah, at that size, and we're talking about this crazy, they're essentially.
Did you say bioblood a minute ago?
Yeah, bioblood.
What is that?
There's a whole. We can't get into it today, but there's a whole thing about basically using what you see in living tissues, where blood is providing all kinds of transport in computational and technological developments. And this is all, it's all at this scale, this size. It's starting to sound straight up biological, right?
Wow. Okay. Sorry. Mine just kind of went. Okay. So because of the limits we have with silicon and our current manufacturing techniques, we're forced to examine how other systems do it, and we're getting our inspiration from biology as far as where we have to go next.
That's the short takeaway from what I read. It sounds like, as we look at efficient systems, the biological systems that we can observe are just highly efficient compared to what we're doing. So,
well, from the possible digital biology to real biology, here's a question for you. If you could be the recipient of a hand transplant, wouldn't you do it? Now, let's assume you need one. You need not you're going to take a perfectly good hand and just because you feel like it get a different one. No, but you're a veteran. You've been injured in a war. You lost your hand. There was an accident in some way, or you were born without a hand, and you had the opportunity to receive a biological hand through a transplant. Wouldn't you do that? Because logically you'd think, oh my gosh, if medical science has gotten there, I would totally do that. And then I would have like a real, flesh and bone hand that would be a part of me. I'm looking at my hand right now, listener. You can't see that, but I'm totally doing it. Logically you'd go, I want that.
It seems like a no-brainer.
Okay, so there's a guy that did this. This guy's name is Jeff Kepner. He had a complication with strep throat, got a sepsis infection, had to have both hands amputated. And the next step for him was prosthetics. So he ended up with 2 prosthetic hands. And he had about 75% use of his hands with those prosthetics. It was his life experience. It's not great, but that is a functioning life. You can get by with 75% of your hands use.
And it's probably the lacking bit was fine motor skills, I would imagine.
Yeah, we're going to talk about this in a minute because I had to do some homework on where we are with the state of the art on prosthetics. But let's stick with Jeff's story for a minute. I mean, he had his chance to have a double hand transplant operation done. And yeah, it was risky. Those were explained to him. He understood the risks. And he's like, we're doing this thing. Mm-hmm. He did it. It did not work out. Jeff reports that his hand function has gone from the 75% he had with the prosthetics down to nothing. He's got really no function, which the doctors say that's not a typical result. That's atypical. But, I mean, Jeff, unfortunately, had the worst case scenario. So he's got bio hands, but no function.
They just kind of flop around?
Yeah. He just reports no function. He didn't get into the specifics of what's going on there. So I don't know if it sounds like no nervous interaction, no, musculoskeletal function whatsoever. So, I mean, zero function to me sounds like he's got hands that he can do nothing with.
Wow.
Whether they're, flaccid, incapable of any sort of articulation, not wired into his brain. It sounds like anything that could have gone wrong went wrong. And which really points back to the original question. I mean, if you were in this situation, you'd think instinctively, I want this.
Right.
Maybe you don't want this. Maybe you don't. Maybe it's too risky right now because we haven't gotten to the point in the medical community where this is a sure thing, and when we're done, it's going to be okay. And plus, Jeff's got the same problems that anyone has when you take someone else's body part and put it in you, the risk of rejection. He's got to take anti-rejection drugs for, the way the article made it sound like, the rest of his life.
Wow.
So that his transplanted hands are not rejected by his body. So it sucks, I feel for this guy. And it's like, well, Jeff's going to go back to prosthetics then. Just these things didn't work out. Chop them off. Give me the prosthetics back. Not so easy. And Jeff's actually decided to not do this.
Oh, really?
Because that is a consideration, and maybe they could do it, but that's risky too. And it's risky to the point of maybe he couldn't really leverage prosthetics anymore either if things went badly there. So he's like, I'm done with procedures. I'm done with all of this. I'm going to leave things as they are. It didn't work for me, but maybe this is information that can help somebody else, kind of thing. So I was kind of curious, what functions would Jeff have had if he had a prosthetic hand?
Sure.
Because you think back in the day, what was it? Just like basically they stick a hand on you and it doesn't really do anything. It's just this thing that looks like a hand stuck over the end of your arm, so that at a glance people wouldn't even notice that you didn't have a hand.
Sure.
But you don't get much use out of it. It's kind of what you'd think, but the state of the art is like way beyond that now. So, I mean, to me, the future would be, Luke Skywalker. He loses his hand, and then they repair it, and they show the close up, and it's like this little skin panel that's flipped
actuators
open.
going in there.
Yeah. He's like moving his fingers, and they're pricking the hand with a pin to make sure that everything's working. And it's like, woo, and Luke's like, it looks like the real thing. It's amazing. And that we're not there. We're not there. But we are kind of impressively far along. And the prosthetic hands today are motorized. Mm-hmm. They can take certain shapes and positions. They are stimulated to move in different ways via at least 4 different ways, depending on the system you're looking at, but gestures. Mm-hmm. An app on your phone that can actually, you can set your hand to be in some specific position based on the phone app. Muscle. So if you've got some muscle that the prosthetic is sitting over, you can flex those muscles in a particular way and cause an action in the hand, which would take some training, but is doable. And then proximity. You get close to some pre-programmed situation, and the hand can react. There's a company called Touch Bionics. They make the iLim Ultra. There's a company called Be Bionic that makes a similar kind of motorized hand, full finger articulation and all of that. They were big over in Europe, I noticed. There's a company I found called Arm Dynamics. This is just a Google search away. It's not like I did anything, heavy research. I just Googled prosthetic hand, and these are the people that came up. They seem to be a reseller of iLim and Be Bionic prosthetics. And again, what the functionality, I watched some videos of some people that use the hand. They were demonstrating what they could do. They can pick things up. They can tie their shoes. And one guy was actually picking up blocks. And so without interacting with a phone or doing anything, you could see his prosthetic hand opening, then fingers and thumb closing around a block, picking up the block, dropping it. And it all happened a little slow, but for the most part, pretty quickly, pretty speedily. And just picking up blocks and moving them from one side of a container to another. And he said life with this thing is not bad. It's not bad. He can easily put and take off clothes, which is actually a problem.
That's a big deal.
He can hold his phone in one hand and do something, hold his phone in the prosthetic hand safely without dropping it and do something with the other hand. Simple functions like getting in and out of the door when your hands are full. If you have one hand, it's that much harder.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So the prosthetic hand gives you that ability.
Then if you're carrying something or,
Another guy mentioned trying to do something like open a bag of crisps. He was a British guy, So imagine trying to open a bag. Those of us with two fully functional hands struggle with this.
They still explode and go everywhere.
He was saying, with an older prosthetic hand that he had, he didn't really have the strength in that hand. It wasn't available to actually hold on to the bag tightly enough to have a grip point, and he'd try to open the bag, and it would he'd just pull it out of the prosthetic hand because it wasn't strong enough. And the modern ones are strong enough now so that you don't lose that grip. Again, that's little things that you don't think about that it's getting there now. So these things are battery powered. They fit over your limb in whatever state, and have all of this functionality that, one guy could even type, not with all 5 fingers, but he could move the prosthetic hand into a position where one finger was out there, so he could do things like hold the shift key down, hold the control key down,
right.
Hit a space bar, do hunt and peck with the prosthetic hand, and then type fully with the other hand, and had the ability to interact with a computer in a reasonably efficient way.
That's pretty cool.
So prosthetics have come a long way.
Yeah, and as the technology continues to progress, it'll be interesting to see when we reach the point. I mean, we've already got technology for growing, it's in a lab, obviously, but growing a tooth from a stem cell. At what point will we be able to take, a pluripotent stem cell and regrow a hand for someone that is their own tissue so that they don't have to take...
That's a really interesting question I would love to ask somebody about, because as soon as you said that, what popped in my head was, this isn't one kind of cell, is it? We got skin cells, muscle cells, bone cells, nervous system cells. There's a lot going on there. And then cardiovascular transport. So when does stem cell research get to the point where you can do that sort of growth?
Yeah. Are we 100 years out from that? Are we, 30 years? Are we 300? It's so hard to project, but someone out there has to have a fairly good idea.
I think we've talked on the show about growing livers from... you build a net of that's like a framework for the organ to grow upon, and you can grow those sorts of things. But again, that's one thing.
That was that
liver
bit,
cells.
That bit about growing the ear on the back of the rat.
Yes,
right. And we got into all of that. Yeah, it's what a time to be alive as far as medical advances.
Well, Eric, we had both kind of investigated solar power for our homes up here in the Northeast U.S. Not the best place in the world because we do have a lot of overcast days and so on, but it was pretty interesting to both of us, and we kind of did the math, and long story short, it didn't work out for us.
Yep.
But a guy in Australia did, and he bought the kind of solar system, solar system. He bought the whole system.
He bought the solar system?
He did. He bought a solar array for his house with batteries to store excess charge from the daytime so that at night he can still draw from that solar power. And he did that with a Tesla Powerwall.
Was he fully off-grid?
He's not fully off-grid.
So he is grid-tied, but he tries to use only his own
grid-tied, but trying to use as much solar as possible to power his house.
Gotcha.
And so he was one of the very first people, he and his family there, to ever get this system. This story comes to us from electrek.co. And the idea was, now that you've had it for 6 months, what do you think? And long story short, he likes it. It's good. The system functions well as intended. And again, the whole point of the Tesla Powerwall, which is basically a big battery you put in your basement or on a wall somewhere, is to store power when in the daytime you've got more power available to you than you can use, but at nighttime you've got nothing coming in from the solar panel. The battery is the buffer in between those two times. But there's a catch, and okay, let me back up a step. He said he went from $5 to $6 a day. He spent 16,000 Australian for the system, about 12,000 US.
That's a lot cheaper than I expected.
It can't be a huge array.
Yeah,
it's my guess.
He can't be using much electricity.
He said he went from spending $5 to $6 Australian a day down to about 59 cents a day.
Wow.
With this system. The catch being
that's like 90%.
It is. It's very much. And so he is doing well, but the payback period is so long that the whole system will be long out of warranty by the time the payback is met. And I think the warranty and the solar stuff, tell me if I'm wrong, Eric, but my opinion is that's a real thing because solar cells lose efficiency over time. Yep. And I think they got about a 20-year expectancy for a panel these days.
Yeah, 2025 usually is what you see.
And then the battery itself, I'm assuming, also has a charge and discharge cycle that will bring it to some kind of service life on this thing, right?
Yep.
So, the money's just not there yet for it to make sense.
Don't do it for economic reasons at this point. Basically, is the bottom line.
Do it because you want to contribute to the not burning fossil fuels to power our lives effort. Yep. I still want to do it, though.
Yeah, I really do. I've got great exposure on my roof. Like, even in New Hampshire, I could easily meet my energy usage threshold on any given day, except for in the very dead of winter. It would be a little tough because the sun just doesn't stay up as long.
And I'm in the same place, a southern-facing roof, and the guy came with this, I don't know how to describe it, there's this meter that gives you a profile of the sun going across your yard during the day. And, I'm right in the sweet spot. Worst case, I've got an oak tree in my front yard that I should remove. Yep. Because it's a little tall. But aside from that, it's a great spot. But the system I had priced out without any battery storage was into 35,000. And the whole point there was rather than store it in a battery, I was going to kick it back into the grid and get credits. But that whole credit thing went away. Right. And made the cost much. Yeah, the economics were like way out of pocket. So
if you're not getting that kickback on your electric bill every month, then it doesn't offset.
Oh, and then one other thing, it wasn't that cost. There was going to have to be some work done on the roof, possibly.
Oh,
because
they were going to have
to heavy.
Add reinforcements to your.
They thought maybe, they were going to have a guy come in and and look at it. But that's another thing. If you're looking at solar, can the trusses in your roof actually support the weight of the panels? Yep, they are not light things. Yep. So I don't know, man. I still want to do it. I'm hoping that this technology takes off, and maybe Tesla's going to get us there.
Yeah, so that's my contribution here on the Tesla front is the merger of Tesla and Solar City. We've all sort of known it was going to happen or was supposed to happen. So the idea here is you have a Tesla in your garage, you put solar panels on your roof, and a Tesla Powerwall on your wall to store it all, right?
My electric life.
Your electric life. Mm-hmm. So Tesla is merging. It's an all-stock transaction. So basically, if you are a Solar City stockholder, you will, for every one share of Solar City stock that you own, you now have or will have 0.11 shares of Tesla, which sounds terrible, but it's all worth the same amount of money. So who cares?
Just all that has to do is with Tesla's valuation versus Solar City's. Then,
right?
That's all that means.
Yeah, it's worth 90.
The cash is the same.
Nine times the. Yeah. So Elon Musk is the chairman of the board for both companies already. So it's not really a big organizational shakeup. His cousin is the CEO.
He's the chairman, and we have nepotism.
Yeah, and nepotism.
Is there conflict of interest concerns or?
I don't know how that works with your cousin. If it's not a direct,
Yeah, but he's the chairman of both. We're saying.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess it's sort of.
I'm buying my company because okay,
because
anyway.
I can. So the goal is basically to provide soup to nuts, the car, the energy that powers the car, a place to store that energy when you're not using it, and also to then, push forward renewable energy for household use. So I said this before quite a while ago, but Tesla reminds me in many ways of Apple as far as its product offerings go and how it markets itself as a premium brand. If you think about how Apple markets their devices, right? You think about the iPhone. There's three basic types of iPhones, right? You have the C budget model. You have the plain, so right now you have the iPhone 6 and then you have the iPhone 6S.
Right.
And then you have the Plus. And
then the Plus, right, yeah.
But you have the cheap model, the mainstream, and then the Plus.
The flagship, right.
Or the S, I should say. And then when you think about buying a Mac, right, you've got the MacBook Pro, the MacBook Air, the iMac, and the Mac Pro. So there's only 5 main computer models. And you don't have a bunch of customization options inside of there beyond, you can put some extra memory in it, maybe a bigger SSD, whatever. That's sort of what Tesla apparently is looking to do with this merger. You bring the two companies together, and now you can sell packages. You may have a Tesla, maybe you don't, whatever. Let's say you don't, but you want a solar package for your home. Well, now Tesla can come in. They can sell you the battery pack. They can sell you the solar panels and all the microinverters and all that. They can do the installation. They can take care of the servicing, etc. And it's a commoditized. You buy this thing,
and they're also going to be able to supply you with a place to plug in your electric car if you want that.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it makes sense from a package standpoint. I need this many kilowatt hours. This package meets that. This is the one I want. Schedule your installation. They take care of it. Bing, bang, boom, you're done. And by the way, buy our, latest model Tesla for your family.
So this is interesting because Tesla is poised to drive economies of scale for batteries in general and then electric vehicles. And so if this merger... Is it done or very close to done?
It actually hasn't even been finalized because they still are technically open to outside bidders. But it's all but done because no one's going to beat the deal and the board won't approve it because Elon Musk is the chairman. But it looks to be finalized in Q4 of 2016.
So if this happens, then it puts Tesla in an interesting position of putting more and more electric vehicles in garages and then having that foot in the door and saying, and gosh, wouldn't you like a Tesla solar cell on your roof and a Tesla Powerwall on your wall? And you already have the car, and you know how amazing that is. I mean, let's take this electric thing a little further, folks. And
exactly.
If they can do that, that will get that economies of scale and start driving the prices down, hopefully, so that mere mortals like us can look at it and go, oh, this is easy. This makes sense. Why wouldn't I do this?
And that's the thing is about Elon Musk is I actually believe that he wants to change the world. It's not just, yes, he's making a boatload of cash, but he's always made a boatload of cash. He was involved in PayPal.
Nothing wrong with making a boatload of cash.
Right. If you can make a boatload of cash while you're changing how the world produces and expends energy in a clean manner, I'm all for it. His goal is to make the world electric. Your car will be electric. Your heating for your home will be electric. You
ever driven down somewhere in America with lots of flat space, or even there's a few of them up here, but basically it's a solar installation with lots of panels, and it takes up an enormous amount of acreage.
Yep.
Trying to do centralized gathering of solar power, it's silly. It's like, this does not scale. This does not work. We'd have to bulldoze the planet. Well, in places. But okay, so now we go back to this model of putting solar panels on your roof where the square footage is already there. There's no change to anything. The solar panels are going on square footage that's already been allotted for a building, for a structure.
Already wasted space, essentially.
And I know the square footage of my roof, which is not small but not massive either, was plenty to meet my power demands.
Yep. So you distribute that. If every new house is built that has these on it, and that's one of the things he talked about in the call that announced this, was their goal is to be on as many new construction roofs as possible. So if, they want to be on 100% of the new homes that are built in the next, 5 years or whatever.
So that's great for the residential areas, right? And rural areas like ours. Man, imagine if everyone around here had solar on the roof. What would the need be for Eversource, our local, not the only, but our main utility that powers, supplies electricity in this area? Demand would go down, enormously. Now, it's not going to fix big commercial installations where, especially think about a city like Manhattan where everything's up. You don't have that many square miles that make up that city, so everything goes vertical. There isn't the square footage there for solar to make much of a dent in that sort of a place. But out here, oh boy,
yeah, if you're distributing that and pumping back into the grid, then rural New York could be helping feed New York City's electrical needs. Now, there was an interesting point in the article where they were talking about how when Elon Musk says, your car's going to be electric, your heat's going to be electric, and all this, he basically was saying, look, utilities, I'm not out to kill off all the utilities, because demand, if we start using electricity to power everything, there's going to be a lot more electricity, needed to do all this. Heating with electricity is actually very expensive here in New England specifically.
Extremely.
Back in the 70s, electric was the big thing. There was the nuclear power plant, and
it's
have
pretty
all
much
the electricity.
The worst way to go now.
Yeah, as far as cost.
Yeah.
But for cleanliness, if you're generating clean energy, it's a no-brainer to go that route. But yes, demand, it's going to be an incredible spike in demand if we actually reach that level of electric.
If I'm a utility, though, I'm still going to be impacted by this in some way. In other words, the way I do business is going to be impacted. The way I make my money is going to change somewhat. Yes, demand's still going to be there. But with solar, if residential solar becomes a really significant player in the power market, it will change the economics of the game.
Yes.
No, the utilities aren't going to go out of business. But, yeah, things are going to be altered in some way. So,
and the Powerwall factors into this as well, where there's a case for using the Powerwall even if you don't have a solar system, because you can charge this thing off peak, and then when it's peak time, you draw from your Powerwall. So you're not paying the peak. Again, it's one of those things where...
That's right, a software decision. Where am I going to pull my power from? Is it cheaper to pull it from the grid, or does it make more sense to pull it out of the wall?
And if you're going that route, you're not going to pay off that power wall doing that. But it does give you the option to charge it off peak, use it on peak.
But it's a viable infrastructure answer. It's like you can see it. It's like, this makes sense. This works.
Finally,
solar
something
on the
that
roof,
makes sense. Exactly.
Battery on the wall. This makes sense. Now, if we can just get the prices down to where it's viable for everyone and it goes mass market.
Economies of scale. That's exactly.
Man, and I bet it's going to happen quick, too.
It should.
I mean, we're talking like a decade.
Yeah.
I bet it's 10 years from now, if we're still doing this show, I bet we'll be talking about how our installs went and all that kind of stuff, because it will have gotten to that point of this is a no-brainer.
Right.
Not that they're going to be giving it away.
This
but
is
it's what
you do. Right.
Yeah. I bet. Well, content I like. I mentioned an article from this earlier, Electrek. So Electrek, ELECTREK .co, electrek.co. It's a sister site to 9to5Mac. It's another one of their properties. So if you're familiar with 9to5Mac.com and you follow them, Electrek looks very much formatted the same. And as the name implies, it's a chronicle of advances in electric transportation and the related companies. And so that kind of means that it's the Tesla newsletter right now, because they seem to have the most news by far and have the most newsworthy sorts of things going on. But they cover other companies as well. And for me, it's a great way to find in one place what's going on the electric vehicle and to some degree related electric power generation stories. You got one, Eric?
Yeah, I've got one. Voltstats.net. So I obviously, as I've spoken about a few times now, and you interviewed me about, I have a 2017 Chevy Volt.
Yeah.
And this site you can sign up for. It'll pull the OnStar data from your Volt and aggregate all of the relevant statistics about your car, how you rank in comparison to other owners of, whether it be the same region, the same year. There are teams or groups that you can join. So I'm a member of the New England Volt drivers.
Is there like a super grandpa driver rating list where if you're like number one with the best fuel economy, you're like super grandpa?
Yes, except it doesn't actually say super grandpa.
But do they do rank that way?
Oh, yeah. You can sort by, number of EV miles driven, percentage of EV. There are some people out there whose, Volts have 99.6% EV usage over their life. And they've put on, hundreds of thousands of miles. And so you can sort by all that. And it really, really tickles every little data nerd bit in me to look at how my stats break down and, to know that I've gone 540 some odd miles without the gas engine even turning on and all this. So
have you put fuel in this thing yet?
I have not put fuel in it yet. And
I know you've burned a little bit, but I mean, how many miles have you driven it now?
Just about 1,500 miles.
Without putting any fuel in the
and I've
8-gallon
burned
tank or whatever.
4 gallons, and that was all in the first 2 weeks.
Oh, brother.
Yeah,
but this is interesting because you get to find out how well are you taking advantage of this drivetrain, this complex drivetrain. Some of it's got to be, just the terrain you're in, that's going to play into your favor or not.
Yeah, and the car itself will actually rate you. Since your last full charge, it's got all these bar graphs. Your technique was good. Your terrain sucked, which I get a lot because there's lots of hills and mountains and whatever.
So voltstats.net.
Yeah, it gives me a lot of extra info that the car itself doesn't give me. My car maxes out at 250 plus miles per gallon rating. And I wanted to know what that was, and this will tell me. I'm at, I think, 304 miles per gallon right now.
Jeez.
So, yeah, it's that's my current little content I like. I'm a little obsessed with that. So did you learn anything today, Ethan?
I did learn something. The Petrous bone. What is the Petrous bone? Well, technically it's part of another bone. So the Petrous bone is sometimes used for ancient DNA sequencing. To read from Wikipedia, the petrous part of the temporal bone is pyramid-shaped and is wedged in at the base of the skull between the sphenoid and occipital bones. Petrous comes from the Latin word petrosus, meaning stone-like or hard. It is one of the densest bones in the body. And then from Ars Technica, there was an article I read about ancient DNA sequencing, and to quote that, they say, if possible, they'll extract DNA from the petrous bone in the inner ear, a gold mine for genetic material that can yield roughly 100 times more ancient DNA than other parts of the skeleton. And our citizenry marches to the horizon. We're at the end of the show this week. We are looking towards the bright hope technology brings us. And just over that horizon, you will find next week. And with another week, another Citizens of Tech, and you have that to look forward to. So lucky you. But if you want more tech love between now and then, head over to the Citizens of Tech subreddit. You can rate the show on iTunes, tell your friends to listen. You could tweet about us on Twitter. You could like us on Facebook. You could even become a Patreon patron at citizensoftech.com. All of that good stuff is going to tide you over between now and our next show. And just remember, there's only 10 kinds of people in the world. Those who understand binary and those who don't.